The Alpha's hand struck the table with such force that every wolf in the great hall flinched. "Get out," he snarled, his voice dripping with venom and disgust. "Get out of my sight, Omega. You're nothing. You were always nothing." And she stood there, trembling, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat belly where their secret grew, knowing that in this moment, her entire world was shattering into 1,000 irreparable pieces. He didn't know. He would never know. Because Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful Alpha in the Northern Territories, had just banished the one woman who carried his bloodline, his legacy, his future, and he did it without a single moment of hesitation. Before we continue this story that will absolutely shatter your heart and then rebuild it in ways you never expected, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from so I can send you a virtual hug. Trust me, you're going to need it after this story. Because what happens next will change everything you think you know about second chances, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and a child that isn't even hers by blood. Now let me take you back to where it all began, 3 years before that devastating moment in the Great Hall. Lucia was nobody. That's what everyone told her. That's what she'd been told her entire life. Born into the lowest rank of the Silvercrest Pack, she was an Omega, the weakest designation a wolf could have. No strength, no status, no voice. In the rigid hierarchy of their world, Omegas existed to serve, to clean, to disappear into the background of more important wolves' lives. They were necessary but invisible, needed but never wanted. She worked in the grand estate of the Aurelius family, scrubbing floors that gleamed like mirrors, washing linens that smelled of lavender and power, preparing meals she would never be invited to eat. The Aurelius bloodline was ancient, stretching back to the old empire itself, when their ancestors had ruled with iron fists and golden crowns. Marcus Aurelius, the current Alpha, was everything an Alpha should be. Tall, commanding, with eyes like molten amber that could freeze a wolf in their tracks or set them ablaze with a single glance. Lucia had learned early to keep her head down when he passed, to make herself small, to become invisible. But invisibility has a strange way of becoming its own kind of visibility. It started on a winter night when the estate was quiet, when most of the pack had gone to the northern borders to deal with a territorial dispute. Lucia was in the library, a place she had no business being, but she couldn't help herself. Books were her escape, her secret rebellion. In the pages of stories, Omegas could be heroes. In the pages of stories, love didn't care about rank. She was so absorbed in a tale of ancient Rome, of gladiators and emperors, of forbidden love and tragic sacrifice, that she didn't hear him enter. "That's one of my favorites," a deep voice said, and Lucia nearly dropped the book in terror. Marcus stood in the doorway, still wearing his travel cloak, snow dusting his dark hair. He should have been furious. She was in a space reserved for family, for pack leaders, for wolves who mattered. But instead, his expression was curious, almost amused. I'm so sorry, Alpha," she stammered, clutching the book to her chest. "I'll leave immediately. What part are you at?" he interrupted, stepping into the room. She blinked, confused. "What? The book. What part are you reading?" The part where Maximus realizes he loves the senator's daughter, even though it will cost him everything," she whispered. Something flickered in Marcus's eyes. "That's the best part. Though the ending will destroy you." "I know," Lucia said softly. "I've read it before." "You've read it before, and you're reading it again." He moved closer, and she caught his scent. Pine and smoke and something wild that made her wolf stir in a way that was absolutely forbidden. "Why torture yourself with a story you know ends in tragedy?" Lucia looked down at the worn pages. "Because even though it ends badly, the love was real. Sometimes the journey matters more than the destination." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and in that moment something shifted, something changed. It was as if he was truly seeing her for the first time, not as an Omega, not as a servant, but as a person, as a soul. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lucia, Alpha." "Just Lucia. Just Lucia." He nodded slowly. "I'm Marcus. I know who you are, Alpha. But I didn't know who you were." He paused. Until now. That conversation should have been the end of it. A strange, fleeting moment between two wolves from different worlds. But fate has a way of weaving threads that seem too delicate to hold, creating tapestries that become unbreakable. 3 nights later, he found her in the library again. And 3 nights after that. And soon it became their ritual. After the estate quieted, after his duties were done, he would find her among the books, and they would talk. About stories. About philosophy. About the weight of leadership and the pain of invisibility. About everything and nothing. My father used to say that strength is the only thing that matters, Marcus told her one night, staring into the fireplace. That compassion is weakness. That an alpha who shows mercy is an alpha who will be overthrown. What do you think? Lucia asked carefully. He turned to look at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes took her breath away. I think I'm tired of being what everyone expects me to be. I think sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose kindness when the world demands cruelty. But the world wasn't kind to wolves who defied expectations. And the world was especially cruel to omegas who dared to dream above their station. Their friendship deepened into something neither of them intended. Late-night conversations became lingering glances. Accidental touches became deliberate ones. And then, one night when the moon was full and the pull between them was unbearable, friendship became something that would change both their lives forever. This is madness, Marcus whispered as he pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. This goes against everything. I know, Lucia breathed. My family will never accept this. The pack will never. I know. But I don't care. His amber eyes blazed with an intensity that made her wolf howl with joy. Lucia, I don't care about any of it. I choose you. For 3 months, they existed in a secret world of stolen moments and whispered promises. Marcus would slip away from pack meetings to find her in the gardens. She would leave her duties early to meet him in the forest where no one could see. They talked about running away, about starting fresh somewhere the pack hierarchy didn't matter, somewhere an alpha and an omega could love each other without shame. But secrets in a wolf pack are like cracks in a dam. Eventually, the pressure becomes too much, and everything comes flooding out. Kasia, Marcus's intended mate, discovered them one night. She was a high-ranking beta, beautiful and cunning, from a powerful family that had been allied with the Aurelius bloodline for generations. The arrangement between her and Marcus had been decided when they were children, a political union to strengthen both families. And Lucia had just destroyed it all. You disgusting little omega, Kasia hissed, her voice dripping with venom. You actually thought he could love something like you. Marcus stepped in front of Lucia protectively. Kasia, this doesn't concern me. Kasia's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. You're meant to be mine, Marcus. Our families have prepared for this union for 20 years. And you're throwing it all away for pack trash. Don't call her that, Marcus growled, his alpha power flooding the space between them. I'll call her what she is. Kasia's eyes narrowed. And I'll make sure everyone else knows what she is too. Homewrecker. Seductress. An omega who used whatever pathetic tricks she has to bewitch the alpha. Lucia felt her heart shatter. Because she knew that this was how the pack would see it. Not as two people who fell in love against all odds, but as an omega who had manipulated her way into the alpha's bed. Give me time, Marcus pleaded with Kasia that night after Lucia had fled. Let me figure out how to handle this properly. I'll talk to my father, I'll make the pack understand. There is nothing to understand, Kasia said coldly. You have a choice, Marcus. Your omega whore or your pack. Your momentary infatuation or your legacy. Your foolish heart or your family's honor. But before Marcus could make that choice, before he could fight for what they had, fate intervened in the cruelest way possible. Tiberius Aurelius, Marcus's father, discovered the truth. And unlike his son, Tiberius felt no conflict, no hesitation, no mercy. The old Alpha was a wolf of the ancient tradition, a believer in the absolute sanctity of pack hierarchy. To him, Marcus's relationship with Lucia wasn't just inappropriate. It was an abomination, a corruption of everything their bloodline stood for. Do you know what happens to a pack when the hierarchy breaks down? Tiberius demanded, his voice like thunder. Chaos. Destruction. The strong become weak, the weak become arrogant, and everything our ancestors built crumbles to dust. Father, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You've allowed your base instincts to cloud your judgment. You've let an Omega seduce you into forgetting your duty, your heritage, your purpose. It wasn't seduction, Marcus protested. I love her. Love. Tiberius spat the word like poison. You think love matters. You think your feelings matter. You are the alpha of this pack, Marcus. You don't get the luxury of love. You have responsibility. You have obligation. You have centuries of bloodline honor to uphold. And then Tiberius did something unforgivable. He spread lies, whispers that grew into roars. He told the pack that Lucia had used Omega manipulation, that she had employed forbidden scents and tricks to ensnare Marcus. He painted her not as a woman in love, but as a calculated predator who had targeted the Alpha for personal gain. The pack, eager for scandal and protective of their hierarchy, believed every word. Within days, Lucia went from invisible to infamous. Wolves who had never noticed her before now sneered when she passed. Mothers pulled their children away from her. Other Omegas, desperate to distance themselves from her shame, refused to acknowledge her existence. And Marcus, caught between his love and his loyalty, between his heart and his duty, began to crack under the pressure. Maybe my father is right, he said one night, his voice hollow. Maybe I have been thinking with my heart instead of my head. Maybe this is just infatuation, chemistry, nothing more. Lucia felt those words pierce through her like silver bullets. You don't mean that. Don't I? He wouldn't look at her. We're from different worlds, Lucia. Maybe it's time we accepted that. 2 weeks ago, you said you'd give up everything for me. 2 weeks ago, I was being naive. His voice grew harder, colder, the voice of an alpha, not the man she loved. 2 weeks ago, I didn't understand what was at stake. And now you do. Now I understand that I have responsibilities that matter more than my personal desires. It was the beginning of the end, but Lucia didn't know that yet. She didn't know that the worst was still to come. Because 3 days after that conversation, Lucia discovered she was pregnant. She stood in her tiny room, staring at the positive test with a mixture of terror and wonder. Child. Marcus's child. A baby that would be born with alpha blood running through its veins, growing in an Omega's womb. Should have been impossible. Alphas and Omegas rarely produced offspring. Their biology was too different, the genetic gap too wide. But somehow, impossibly, miraculously, life had found a way. Lucia spent 2 days trying to figure out how to tell Marcus. 2 days of rehearsing words that never felt right. 2 days of imagining his reaction. Would he be thrilled? Terrified? Would this change everything? But she never got the chance to tell him. Because on the 3rd day, Tiberius made his final move. The old Alpha summoned Lucia to the Great Hall, the same hall where pack judgments were rendered, where wolves were elevated or destroyed. She went because she had no choice. And when she arrived, she found the entire pack waiting, their eyes filled with judgment and condemnation. Marcus stood at the front beside his father, his face a mask of stone. Lucia of no surname, Tiberius began, his voice echoing through the hall. You have been accused of manipulation, seduction, and the corruption of an alpha. How do you answer these charges? I never manipulated anyone, Lucia said, her voice shaking. Marcus and I. We fell in love. That's not a crime. An Omega doesn't fall in love with an alpha, Tiberius snapped. An Omega schemes, but uses her feminine wiles to trap a male of superior status. That's not what happened. Then explain to this pack, Cassia said, stepping forward with a cruel smile. Why our Alpha, who has never shown interest in any Omega, suddenly became obsessed with you? Explain what techniques you used. What forbidden scents you wore. What manipulation tactics you employed. I didn't use anything. Just... we talked. We became friends, and then... Friends. Tiberius laughed bitterly. An Alpha doesn't befriend the help. He commands them. Unless that help has some ulterior motive, some scheme to elevate herself beyond her proper station. Lucia's eyes found Marcus, pleading. Tell them the truth. Tell them it was real. For a long moment Marcus said nothing. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. And then, in a voice that Lucia barely recognized, he spoke. My father is right, Marcus said coldly. I allowed myself to be manipulated. I allowed my judgment to be clouded. I mistook chemistry for something deeper. And in doing so, I dishonored my pack, my family, and myself. Lucia felt her world tilt. Marcus, no. Don't do this. Please. You are an Omega, he continued. His amber eyes now cold and distant. And I am an Alpha. There is no world where we belong together. I see that now. I understand my father's wisdom, and I recognize my own foolishness. But what we had was a mistake. He stepped forward, and the power radiating from him made every wolf in the hall submit, including Lucia, whose knees buckled under the weight of his Alpha command. You took advantage of a moment of weakness. You exploited my kindness for your own gain. And now you will face the consequences. That's when Tiberius smiled, and Lucia knew she was about to lose everything. By the ancient laws of our pack, Tiberius declared, an Omega who attempts to seduce an Alpha above her station will be banished, stripped of pack bonds, sent into the world as a rogue, unprotected and unwelcome in any territory. No, Lucia whispered. Please no. Furthermore, Tiberius continued, her name will be stricken from our records. Her existence will be forgotten. She will become a ghost, a cautionary tale, a warning to other Omegas who dare to dream above their station. Lucia looked at Marcus one last time, tears streaming down her face. And she almost told him, almost revealed the secret growing in her womb, the child that would change everything. But she looked at his cold, closed-off expression, at the finality in his eyes, and she realized. He would take the child. He would claim it as an Alpha heir and raise it without her. She would lose not just him but the baby too. So she said nothing. Get out, Marcus said, his voice devoid of emotion. Get out of my sight, Omega. You're nothing. You were always nothing. And just like that, Lucia's world shattered. She was dragged from the hall, stripped of the few belongings she had, and escorted to the pack borders. As the sun set, as she stepped beyond the territory lines, she felt the pack bond snap, a physical pain that brought her to her knees. She was alone now. Truly, completely alone. Except she wasn't. Because growing inside her was a piece of Marcus, a piece of the love they'd shared, a piece of something that had been real even if he now claimed it was false. She placed her hand on her stomach and whispered, I'll protect you. No matter what happens, I'll keep you safe. And so began 3 years of survival. Lucia wandered as a rogue, moving from town to town, always looking over her shoulder, always expecting to be chased off or worse. Rogues were vulnerable, without a pack, without bonds, without protection. They were easy targets for other wolves, for hunters, for anyone who wanted to hurt someone who couldn't fight back. But Lucia was stronger than anyone, including herself, had realized. She found work in human towns, using fake credentials and false names. She saved every penny, preparing for the child who was coming. And when her daughter was born on a cold October night, with only a human midwife to help, Lucia held the tiny baby and wept tears of both joy and grief. I'll name you Aurelia, she whispered, looking into eyes that were the exact shade of amber as Marcus's. After your father's bloodline. Even if he'll never know you, you'll carry his name in your heart. Aurelia was perfect. Half Alpha, half Omega, all miracle. She was stronger than a normal Omega child but gentler than an Alpha pup. She had her father's eyes and her mother's soft heart. And Lucia loved her with a fierceness that surprised even herself. They built a life in a small coastal town, far from packed territories. Lucia worked 3 jobs, waitressing during the day, cleaning offices at night, and taking online courses whenever she could to build a better future. It was exhausting. It was lonely. But every time she looked at Aurelia's smiling face, she knew it was worth it. "Mama, why don't I have a daddy?" Aurelia asked one day when she was 3 years old, her amber eyes wide with innocent curiosity. Lucia's heart clenched. "You do have a daddy, baby. He lives far away. Does he love me?" "He doesn't know about you," Lucia said carefully. "But if he did, he would love you so much. Because you're the most lovable little girl in the whole world." Aurelia seemed satisfied with that answer, and Lucia breathed a sigh of relief. But she knew that one day, the questions would get harder. One day, she'd have to explain why they lived alone, why they had no pack, why Aurelia's father was absent from her life. But fate had other plans. Because 3 years after her banishment, everything changed in a single, impossible moment. Lucia was walking through the farmer's market with Aurelia when she caught a scent that made her blood run cold. Pine and smoke and something wild. It couldn't be. It was impossible. They were hundreds of miles from the Silvercrest Pack territory. But then she saw him. Marcus Aurelius stood at a vendor stall, examining handmade leather goods, looking every inch the powerful alpha he'd always been. He was there on pack business, negotiating with the local human government about territory boundaries. And he had no idea that his former Omega, the woman he'd banished in shame, was standing 50 feet away with his daughter. Lucia's instinct was to run, to grab Aurelia and disappear before he saw them. But before she could move, before she could hide, Aurelia's little voice rang out clear as a bell. "Mama, that man looks like me." And Marcus turned. His amber eyes locked with Lucia's. And in that moment, 3 years of distance collapsed into nothing. He crossed to them in long strides, his expression unreadable. "Lucia." "Alpha," she whispered, instinctively putting Aurelia behind her. His eyes dropped to the little girl clutching her mother's leg, and Lucia watched as recognition dawned. Those eyes, that scent. The unmistakable trace of his bloodline in the child's features. "Is she?" He couldn't even finish the question. "We're leaving," Lucia said quickly, taking Aurelia's hand. "We don't want any trouble." "Wait." Marcus's voice was raw. "Please. Just wait." But Lucia had spent 3 years rebuilding herself, building walls around her heart, protecting her daughter. She wasn't about to let Marcus Aurelius shatter them again. Ran through the market, down side streets, with Aurelia protesting and confused. They made it back to their tiny apartment, and Lucia immediately started packing. They had to leave, had to run. A knock on the door froze her in place. "Lucia, please." Marcus's voice came through the thin wood. "I just want to talk. I'm not here to hurt you. I swear on my alpha blood, I mean no harm." An alpha's oath was sacred, unbreakable. If he'd sworn on his bloodline, he meant it. Slowly, carefully, Lucia opened the door. Marcus stood there, and up close, she could see that he'd changed. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. A weariness in his expression, as if the years had worn on him too. "She's mine, isn't she?" he asked quietly. Lucia lifted her chin. "She's mine. I'm the one who carried her, who birthed her, who's raised her for 3 years while you went on with your perfect pack life. Why didn't you tell me?" "Tell you?" Lucia's laugh was bitter. "When would I have told you, Marcus? Before you banished me. When you stood in front of the entire pack and called what we had a mistake. When you let your father brand me as a manipulator and a seductress." "I didn't know," he said, his voice breaking. "Lucia, if I'd known you were pregnant, you would have what? Taken the baby and raised her without me. Let your father turn her against me. Tell her I was just some Omega who tried to trap you. At least this way she knows love. She knows safety. She knows her mother would burn the world down to protect her. Marcus flinched as if she'd struck him. You're right. You're absolutely right. Failed you. I failed both of you. He paused. But I need you to understand something. That day in the Great Hall, when I said those things. Don't. Lucia held up her hand. Don't try to explain it away. Don't try to make excuses. You made your choice, Marcus. You chose your pack, your father, your reputation. I don't blame you for that. I understand that's what alphas do. But don't stand here now and pretend it was anything other than what it was. It wasn't what it looked like, Marcus insisted. My father threatened you. He said if I didn't publicly reject you, he would have you killed. Not just banished, killed. He said he'd make it look like an accident, a rogue attack, and no one would question it. I had to make you leave, Lucia. I had to make you go before he could hurt you. Lucia felt her breath catch. You're lying. I'm not. I swear on my alpha blood, I'm telling you the truth. His amber eyes glistened with unshed tears. I thought if I hurt you badly enough, if I made you hate me, you'd run far and fast and my father would never be able to reach you. I thought I was saving your life. But I didn't know, I never imagined, that you were carrying our child. The apartment door creaked open, and Aurelia peeked out, her amber eyes wide. Mama, are you crying? Lucia quickly wiped her tears. No, baby, I'm fine. Go back inside. But Aurelia's eyes had found Marcus, and there was a curious recognition there. The recognition of blood calling to blood, of pack bonds trying to form despite the distance. Are you my daddy? Aurelia asked with the brutal honesty that only a 3-year-old could possess. Marcus dropped to his knees, bringing himself to her eye level. And when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I didn't know you existed, little one. But yes, I'm your father. Mama said you lived far away. I did. Do. But not anymore. He looked up at Lucia. Never again. Before Lucia could respond, before she could process what was happening, a sound outside made all three of them freeze. Growl. Low and menacing. And then another. And another. Get inside, Marcus commanded. His alpha power flooding the space. Now. Lucia grabbed Aurelia and pulled her into the apartment. Marcus followed, slamming the door behind them. Do you have silver? Wolfsbane. Any weapons? What's happening? Rogues. At least 6 of them, maybe more. They must have followed my scent here. He cursed viciously. My presence has marked this place as Alpha territory. They're going to challenge. What do we do? Marcus looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw the wolf he'd been before his father's influence. The one who'd talked about choosing kindness over cruelty. Who'd said strength could be found in mercy. You take Aurelia and you run. There's a back window in the bedroom. I can smell it. You go now and you don't look back. What about you? I'll hold them off as long as I can. He pulled out his phone, quickly typing a message. My pack is 3 hours away. They'll come, but I don't know if I can last that long against 6 rogues. Then we fight together, Lucia said firmly. You're an Omega. I'm a mother, she interrupted. And I've survived 3 years as a rogue in a world that wanted me dead. Don't underestimate what I'm capable of, Alpha. Something flickered in Marcus's eyes. Respect, admiration, maybe even love. Just like old times then. You and me against the world. Just like old times. The rogues hit the door like a battering ram. Wood splintered. The lock gave way. And suddenly, the tiny apartment was filled with snarling savage wolves who wanted nothing more than to tear apart the Alpha who'd wandered into their territory. What happened next was chaos and violence and desperation. Marcus fought like the Alpha he was. All power and fury and devastating strikes. But he was outnumbered, and even an Alpha has limits. That's when Lucia did something no one expected. She shifted. Omegas weren't supposed to be able to shift. The transformation required too much strength, too much energy, too much dominance. But Lucia had spent 3 years surviving impossible odds. She'd spent 3 years being told she was nothing while proving she was everything. And she'd spent 3 years protecting a child who meant more to her than her own life. Her wolf was smaller than the rogue's. Smaller than Marcus's. But she was fast and fierce and absolutely unafraid. Together they fought. Alpha and Omega, the way it should have been from the beginning. Marcus's raw power combined with Lucia's quick intelligence, her ability to anticipate and adapt. They moved like they'd been fighting together for years, like they were two halves of the same whole. By the time Marcus's pack arrived 3 hours later, 4 rogues were dead, 2 had fled, and Marcus and Lucia stood back to back, bloodied and exhausted but alive. Tiberius was with the rescue party. The old Alpha took one look at the scene. His son standing protectively beside an Omega, a small child hiding behind them both, and his expression darkened with understanding. "Explain," Tiberius commanded. "This is Lucia," Marcus said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "The woman I love. The woman you forced me to banish under threat of death. And this," he gestured to Aurelia, who peeked out with amber eyes that were unmistakably Aurelius. "This is my daughter. Your granddaughter." The pack behind Tiberius erupted in whispers. Kasia, who'd come with the rescue party, looked like she might be sick. "That's impossible," Tiberius said. "Alphas and Omegas can't. And yet here she is." Marcus lifted Aurelia into his arms, and the little girl immediately curled against his chest, recognizing her father's scent, responding to the pack bond trying to form. "Here is the proof that everything you told me was a lie. That Omegas aren't weak. That the hierarchy isn't absolute. That love is stronger than any rule you could create. Marcus, you don't understand what you're doing. If you bring them back to the pack..." "I'm not asking your permission, father." Marcus's alpha power rolled out like thunder, making every wolf except Lucia submit. Even Tiberius, old powerful Tiberius, felt his knees start to buckle. "I am the alpha now, and I'm making a new rule. Any pack member who harms Lucia or Aurelia will answer to me. Any wolf who questions their place in the Silvercrest Pack will be banished. And any alpha who tries to separate a father from his child or a man from the woman he loves will be removed from power." It was a coup. A quiet, bloodless overthrow. And every wolf there knew it. Tiberius looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw something he hadn't expected. He saw an alpha who was stronger because of his Omega, not weaker. An alpha who had found his true power not in domination but in protection. "You're making a mistake," Tiberius said quietly. "Maybe," Marcus agreed. "But it's my mistake to make." They returned to the Silvercrest Pack territory the next day. Marcus, Lucia, and Aurelia. The entire pack gathered to witness their arrival, and the whispers were deafening. The banished Omega. The alpha who'd defied his father. The impossible child who carried bloodlines that shouldn't mix. Marcus stood before his pack with Lucia at his side, not behind him, beside him, and made a declaration that would change their world. 3 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life," he said, his voice carrying across the gathering. "I let fear and tradition and my father's threats convince me to banish the woman I loved. I told myself I was protecting her. But I was really just protecting myself, protecting my reputation, my position, my pride." He looked down at Aurelia, who was holding both her parents' hands. "I lost 3 years with my daughter. 3 years of bedtime stories and first words and tiny hands reaching for me in the dark. I lost 3 years of watching her grow, of being there for her first shift, of teaching her about her heritage. I can never get those years back." Lucia's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "So I'm making a choice right now," Marcus continued. "I'm choosing love over law. I'm choosing family over tradition. I'm choosing the future over the past. Lucia is my mate. Aurelia is my heir. And any wolf who has a problem with that can challenge me right here, right now." The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved. No one spoke. Because they all knew, even if they didn't agree, that Marcus was the strongest alpha the Silvercrest Pack had seen in generations. And now, with Lucia beside him, he was even stronger. But this isn't a simple happily ever after. Because pack dynamics don't change overnight. Because omegas don't suddenly become equals just because the alpha declares it. Because Kasha and her allies and the old guard who believed in the ancient ways weren't about to give up without a fight. The next 6 months were warfare of a different kind. Political maneuvering, social sabotage, whispered campaigns to undermine Lucia's position. Kasha spread rumors that Aurelia wasn't really Marcus's child, that Lucia had trapped him with a false pregnancy, that the DNA test was fabricated. Other omegas, fearing backlash, distanced themselves from Lucia. High-ranking wolves refused to acknowledge her authority. And there were attempts, subtle but real, to hurt her, to make her leave, to prove that an omega could never truly belong at an alpha's side. But Lucia wasn't the same frightened girl who'd been banished 3 years ago. She'd been forged in fire, tempered by survival, strengthened by motherhood. And she refused to break. When Kasha publicly challenged her right to be Luna, Lucia didn't back down. "You're right," she said calmly. "I'm an omega. I'm not as strong as you, not as powerful, not as high-ranking. But I've survived things you can't imagine. I've protected a child on my own in rogue territory. I've built a life from nothing. And I've earned my place here not through birthright but through determination." She looked around at the gathered wolves. "So yes, judge me for my rank. Judge me for my bloodline. Judge me for being born into the lowest designation. But don't ever doubt that I belong here. Because I've proven it in ways none of you will ever have to." It was the moment everything shifted. Because other omegas heard her words and found their own courage. Because young wolves saw that strength could come in different forms. Because even the old guard, the wolves who'd lived their entire lives believing in the absolute hierarchy, began to question whether the old ways were the only ways. And then came the night that changed everything forever. Aurelia, now 3.5 years old, developed a fever. At first it seemed like a normal childhood illness. Nothing to worry about. But within hours, the fever spiked dangerously high. Her small body convulsed. Her wolf tried to surface and couldn't. And the pack's healer took one look at her and said the words that made Lucia's blood run cold. "It's rejection sickness. Her alpha blood and omega blood are at war inside her body. I've never seen this before, but I've read about it in the ancient texts. When an alpha and omega produce offspring, sometimes the child's body can't reconcile the two bloodlines. The alpha part wants to dominate, the omega part wants to submit, and the conflict tears the child apart from the inside. How do we fix it?" Marcus demanded, his voice desperate. "You can't. There's no cure. The child either finds balance on her own or..." The healer trailed off, but everyone understood what she meant. "Or the child dies." For 3 days, Aurelia burned with fever. For 3 days, she drifted in and out of consciousness, her small body fighting a battle that no child should have to fight. Lucia never left her side, holding her hand, singing lullabies, begging her to hold on. Marcus was a wreck. The powerful alpha who'd overthrown his father, who'd defied pack tradition, who'd fought off 6 rogues without flinching. He was helpless against an enemy he couldn't fight. He couldn't command the illness away. He couldn't dominate it into submission. He could only watch as his daughter suffered. On the 3rd night, when the healer said there was nothing more she could do, when even Marcus's hope began to fade, something miraculous happened. Aurelia opened her eyes, those perfect amber eyes, and reached out a tiny hand. Not toward Marcus. Not toward the healer. Toward Lucia. "Mama," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't go." Lucia gathered her daughter close, tears streaming down her face. "Never, baby. I'm never leaving you. Never again." And as she held her child, as she poured every ounce of love and determination and fierce maternal protection into that embrace, something shifted in Aurelia's body. The fever broke. The convulsions stopped. The war between alpha and omega blood found its balance, not through one side winning, but through both sides learning to coexist. The healer stared in wonder. I've never seen anything like this. The child shouldn't have survived. But she found balance. She found peace between the two bloodlines. How? Marcus asked. The healer looked at Lucia, still holding Aurelia close. Love. Pure, unconditional, powerful love. The kind of love that bridges impossible gaps. The kind of love that an Omega gives, not through strength or dominance, but through absolute, unwavering devotion. It was in that moment that the pack truly understood. Omegas weren't weak, they were the foundation. They weren't lesser, they were essential. Their power wasn't in commanding but in connecting, not in dominating but in nurturing, not in ruling but in loving so fiercely that it could literally save a life. The next morning, when Aurelia was strong enough to walk, she did something that no one expected. She walked into the great hall where the pack was gathered, holding both her parents' hands, and she spoke with a clarity that belied her age. I'm not just Alpha, she said, her voice small but firm. And I'm not just Omega. I'm both. And that makes me stronger, not weaker. My mama taught me that. She taught me that love is the greatest strength there is. Then she turned to Marcus. And my papa taught me that real alphas protect the weak, not hurt them. Real alphas choose what's right, not what's easy. And finally, she looked at the gathered pack. So I'm going to be an alpha one day. But I'm going to be a different kind of alpha. The kind that understands that every wolf in the pack matters. Every rank, every designation, every voice. At 3.5 years old, Aurelia Aurelius delivered a speech that would echo through pack history for generations. But the story doesn't end there. Because true change takes time, and true transformation requires sacrifice. Over the next year, Marcus and Lucia worked to rebuild the pack structure from the ground up. They established new laws. Omegas could own property, could refuse assignments, could speak at pack meetings. They created education programs so that wolves of all ranks could learn and grow. They opened channels for grievances so that no wolf felt voiceless or powerless. And they faced resistance. Oh, how they faced resistance. Tiberius, stripped of his alpha authority but still commanding respect among the old guard, launched a campaign to undermine everything Marcus built. He spread whispers that the pack was becoming weak, that their enemies would see the changes as vulnerability, that tradition existed for a reason. Cassia, bitter and vengeful, tried 3 times to hurt Lucia, once with poison in her food, once with a staged accident, and once with an outright physical attack. Each time she was stopped. Each time, Marcus wanted to have her executed for attacking his Luna. But Lucia stopped him. If you kill her, you prove her point, Lucia said quietly. You prove that we're just as brutal, just as unforgiving, just as bound by the old ways as the wolves were trying to change. Let her stay. Let her see that mercy is stronger than vengeance. So Cassia was exiled instead of executed, sent away with her life intact but her status destroyed. It was a punishment worse than death for a high-ranking beta who'd spent her life believing in her own superiority. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, the pack began to change. Young wolves who'd grown up watching Lucia's journey began to question the hierarchy they'd been taught to accept. Omegas found their voices. Betas reconsidered their positions. Even some alphas began to understand that strength didn't mean cruelty, that power didn't mean oppression. 2 years after Lucia's return, the Silvercrest Pack held a ceremony that had never been done before, a formal Luna claiming, where Marcus would officially make Lucia his mate in front of the entire pack and the neighboring territories' representatives. The night before the ceremony, Lucia stood in front of a mirror, staring at her reflection. She looked different than she had 4 years ago. Older, yes, but also stronger. More confident. The frightened Omega who'd scrubbed floors and hidden in libraries was gone, replaced by a woman who'd survived the unsurvivable and emerged victorious. Having second thoughts, Marcus asked, coming up behind her. About you. Never. She turned to face him. About this. Constantly. I'm about to stand in front of hundreds of wolves and claim a position that everyone says I don't deserve. I'm about to become Luna. Me, an Omega who was banished in shame. Part of me still can't believe this is real. Marcus cupped her face gently. You've always been my Luna, Lucia. From the moment we met in that library. From the moment you told me that sometimes the journey matters more than the destination. You've been leading this pack without a title for 2 years. Tomorrow just makes it official. What if I fail? What if I'm not strong enough? You've survived 3 years as a rogue with a child. You've fought off attackers. You've faced down the entire pack and won their respect through sheer determination. You've saved our daughter's life with nothing but love. He kissed her forehead. Trust me when I say, you're more than strong enough. The Luna claiming ceremony was held under a full moon, as tradition demanded. Lucia wore a dress that was both Omega simple and Luna elegant, a balance like everything else in her life. Aurelia stood beside her in a matching miniature version, the heir apparent, already showing signs of the powerful wolf she would become. Marcus stood at the center of the gathering, every inch the alpha, and spoke the ancient words that would bind them. I claim this woman as my Luna, my mate, my equal partner in all things. Let any wolf who would challenge this claim step forward now. In the past, this would have been a formality. No one challenged an alpha's choice of mate. But tonight was different. Tonight, the entire pack held its breath, wondering if someone would step forward, would object, would try one last time to prevent an Omega from becoming Luna. Tiberius stood at the edge of the crowd, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing. And then, slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward. Pack gasped. Marcus tensed. Lucia's heart hammered in her chest. But Tiberius didn't challenge. Instead, he dropped to one knee, a gesture of submission from one alpha to another. I was wrong, the old alpha said, his voice carrying across the silent gathering. I spent my life believing that strength was everything, that hierarchy was sacred, that tradition was infallible. And in holding those beliefs, I nearly destroyed the best thing that ever happened to this pack. He looked up at Lucia, and there were tears in his ancient eyes. You proved me wrong on every count. You showed me that an Omega can have the heart of a warrior, that love is stronger than law, that change is necessary for survival. I fought against you because I was afraid that everything I'd built my life on was a lie. But you weren't destroying our pack. You were saving it. He turned to Marcus. Your Luna is worthy. And I'm sorry, to both of you, that it took me so long to see it. It was the apology Lucia never expected. The validation she never thought she'd receive. And as Tiberius stood and bowed formally to her, an alpha bowing to an Omega, something broke open in her chest. Not with pain but with release. The ceremony continued without further objection. Marcus completed the Luna claiming, marking Lucia with his scent, with his vow, with his eternal commitment. And when he kissed her at the end, the entire pack, even the wolves who'd opposed her, howled their acceptance into the night sky. Lucia had gone from banished Omega to claimed Luna. From nothing to everything. And she'd done it not by changing who she was, but by refusing to be anyone else. That night, after the celebrations had ended and Aurelia was tucked safely into bed, Marcus and Lucia stood on the balcony of their chambers, looking out over the territory that was now theirs to lead. Do you ever regret it? Marcus asked quietly. The 3 years you spent alone, raising Aurelia without me, suffering because of choices I made? Lucia was quiet for a long moment. I regret that we lost that time. I regret that Aurelia didn't know her father for the first 3 years of her life. I regret every moment you weren't there. I'm sorry. But I don't regret who I became, she continued. Those 3 years made me strong enough to stand here now. They taught me that I didn't need a pack to survive, which meant I could return on my own terms, not as someone desperate for acceptance. They gave me the strength to face down your father, to challenge Kasha, to rebuild this pack into something better. She turned to look at him. If I'd stayed, if you'd fought for me back then, I would have always been the Omega you'd saved, the weak one you'd protected. But now I'm the Luna I chose to become. And that makes all the difference. Marcus pulled her close, and they stood together in the moonlight, Two halves of an impossible whole, Alpha and Omega, strength and compassion, power and love. But every story has a final challenge. Every transformation has a final test. And theirs came 6 months later, in the form of a threat that would determine whether their new pack structure could survive in the harsh reality of the wolf world. The Northern Coalition, an alliance of traditional packs who'd heard about the Silvercrest Pack's reforms, sent a delegation with an ultimatum. Either Marcus would return the pack to the old hierarchy, or they would be considered enemies of the coalition. Allies would be lost. Trade would be cut off. And if it came to war, the Silvercrest Pack would stand alone. They want to make an example of us, Marcus explained to his council. They're afraid that if we succeed, other packs will follow. Other Omegas will demand equality. The entire wolf world will change. And the wolves in power don't want that. So what do we do? One of the council members asked. Everyone looked to Marcus. But before he could answer, Lucia spoke. We fight. The room went silent. Even Marcus looked surprised. Not with claws and teeth, Lucia clarified. We fight with proof. We show them that our pack isn't weaker because of equality. It's stronger. We show them that when every wolf has a voice, when every rank matters, when Omegas are empowered instead of oppressed, the entire pack benefits. How? Another council member asked skeptically. By winning the Summit Games. The Summit Games were an ancient tradition, a competition held every 5 years where packs from across the territories competed in tests of strength, strategy, and unity. The winning pack earned massive prestige, influential alliances, and territorial advantages. No pack with an Omega Luna had ever competed, let alone won. That's impossible, Tiberius said, even though he was no longer in power. He'd been invited to the council as an advisor. The games test alpha strength, beta cunning, and pack coordination. They're designed around the traditional hierarchy. An Omega Luna would be seen as a liability. Unless we change the rules, Lucia said quietly. Or rather, unless we play by the rules in a way no one expects. Over the next 3 months, Lucia did something unprecedented. She trained alongside the competition team. Not as a figurehead or a mascot, but as an actual competitor. She worked harder than anyone, pushed herself beyond every limit, and proved that determination could overcome designation. But more importantly, she changed how the team prepared. Traditional pack training was hierarchical. Alphas led, betas followed, omegas supported. Lucia introduced collaborative strategies where every wolf's strengths were utilized, where omega intelligence was valued as much as alpha power, where the team functioned as a unified whole rather than a strict pyramid. The pack elders were horrified. The traditionalists called it sacrilege. Even some of Marcus's supporters worried that Lucia was making them look weak. But Marcus trusted his Luna. And when the Summit Games began, the Silvercrest Pack was ready to prove that evolution wasn't weakness. It was survival. The games lasted 5 days, with competitions in combat, strategy, endurance, and pack coordination. The Silvercrest Pack didn't win every event. The alphas from more traditional packs were physically stronger in pure combat tests. But in every event that required thinking, adapting, or working together, the Silvercrest Pack dominated. In the strategy competition, an omega from their pack, a wolf who'd spent years being told she wasn't smart enough to matter, outmaneuvered alpha strategists who'd been trained since birth. In the endurance race, their mixed-rank relay team beat pure alpha teams because they knew how to pace themselves, how to support each other, how to use each wolf's unique strengths. And in the final event, a pack coordination challenge that tested how well wolves could work together under pressure, the Silvercrest Pack achieved a perfect score, something that had only happened 3 times in the game's 500-year history. When the final results were announced, when the Silvercrest Pack was declared the winner, when Marcus and Lucia stood on the platform accepting the summit crown, the entire wolf world watched in stunned silence. An Omega Luna had just led her pack to victory at the most prestigious competition in their world. Everything the traditionalists believed had just been proven wrong. And wolves across every territory began to whisper about change, about possibility, about a future where designation didn't determine destiny. The Northern Coalition's ultimatum dissolved. How could they declare war on the pack that had just won the Summit Games? How could they claim weakness in wolves who'd proven their strength? But more than that, how could they stop the tide of change that Lucia had started? Within a year, 3 other packs began implementing reforms. Within 2 years, 8 more followed. Within 5 years, the entire wolf world was engaged in a heated debate about hierarchy, equality, and the role of omegas in pack society. Not everyone agreed. Not every pack changed. But the conversation had started, and once started, it couldn't be stopped. And it all began with one omega who refused to accept that her designation defined her worth. 10 years after her banishment, Lucia stood in the same great hall where she'd once been condemned. But now she stood as Luna, respected and powerful, with Marcus at her side and Aurelia, now 13 and showing signs of being one of the strongest alpha heirs in generations, standing proud and confident. They held a ceremony that day to honor the anniversary of the reforms, to celebrate how far the pack had come, to remember the struggles that had brought them here. And Lucia, who'd once been voiceless, who'd once been powerless, who'd once been told she was nothing, gave a speech that would be quoted in pack histories for centuries to come. 10 years ago, I stood in this hall and was told that my love was manipulation, that my presence was corruption, that an omega could never stand beside an alpha without diminishing him. She paused, looking around at the gathered wolves, alphas, betas, and omegas all listening with equal respect. I was banished. Stripped of everything except the child growing in my womb and the determination in my heart. I could have given up. I could have accepted what they told me, that I was nothing, that I would always be nothing. But I had a daughter to raise. And I refused to let her grow up believing that her worth was determined by her rank rather than her character. She looked at Marcus, and the love between them was palpable. This man made mistakes. He hurt me. He failed me. But he also learned from those mistakes. He chose to evolve. And together we proved that change is possible, that tradition isn't sacred just because it's old, that the strongest packs are those that value every member. Then she looked directly at the omegas in the crowd. If you take nothing else from my story, take this. You are not your designation. You are not weak. You are not lesser. You are the foundation upon which every pack stands. Your compassion is not weakness. It's the glue that holds us together. Your gentleness is not cowardice. It's the courage to remain soft in a world that demands hardness. Your love is not manipulation. It's the most powerful force in our world. So stand tall. Speak loud. Demand respect. And never, ever let anyone tell you that you don't deserve to be seen, heard, and valued. The applause that followed wasn't polite or obligatory. It was thunderous, genuine, and filled with emotion. Wolves who'd once sneered at Lucia now bowed to her. Omegas who'd once avoided her now looked at her with hope and gratitude. Even the few remaining traditionalists couldn't deny that she'd earned her place, earned her title, earned every bit of respect she now commanded. That night, as the celebrations continued, Aurelia found her mother standing alone in the garden where Lucia and Marcus had once met in secret. "Mama," Aurelia said softly, "can I ask you something?" "Always, baby. Do you ever wish things had been different? That you'd never been banished? That Papa had fought for you from the beginning? That you'd never had to be alone?" Lucia considered the question carefully. "You know what's strange? I used to wish that all the time. Every night for those 3 years I'd lie awake and imagine a different life. One where your father had been brave enough to defy his father from the start, where we'd never been separated, where I'd never had to struggle." "But," Aurelia prompted, "but then I realized something. If things had been easy, I would never have learned my own strength. If your father had simply declared me his Luna without any resistance, I would have always wondered if I deserved it. If I'd never been forced to survive on my own, I would never have discovered that I could." She pulled her daughter close. "Pain has a purpose, sweet girl. Teaches us, shapes us. It shows us who we really are beneath all the fears and doubts. I wouldn't wish my journey on anyone. But I also wouldn't trade it because it made me into the woman I am now. The Luna this pack needed. The mother you deserved. The mate your father can truly stand beside as an equal. Aurelia was quiet for a moment, processing her mother's words with the wisdom of a young wolf who'd already seen more than most. When I become Alpha, I'm going to make sure no Omega ever has to prove themselves the way you did. I'm going to make sure that respect is given automatically, not earned through suffering. Lucia smiled, pride swelling in her chest. That's exactly what the next generation should do. Build on what we've started, make it better, take it further. But remember, sweet girl, change is never finished. It's an ongoing process. Every generation has to fight for it in their own way. Then I'll fight, Aurelia said fiercely. Just like you did. I know you will. And you'll be magnificent. Marcus found them there in the garden, standing together in the moonlight, and he joined them without a word. The three of them, Alpha, Luna, and Heir, standing together as a family, as a symbol, as proof that love could overcome any hierarchy, any tradition, any obstacle. This is where most stories would end. With a happily ever after, with a reformed pack, with a family united and the world changed. But life isn't a story, and real change is messy and complicated and ongoing. So let me tell you what happened next, the parts that most stories don't include. Lucia and Marcus's relationship wasn't perfect. They fought sometimes, about pack politics, about parenting decisions, about how to handle wolves who still clung to the old ways. Marcus sometimes slipped into alpha-dominant behaviors, trying to make decisions for Lucia instead of with her. Lucia sometimes pushed too hard, demanded too much change too quickly, and created resistance where patience might have been wiser. But they learned to communicate. They learned to compromise. They learned that loving someone doesn't mean agreeing on everything. It means respecting each other enough to work through the disagreements. Aurelia grew into a complex young woman who struggled with the expectations placed on her as the daughter of revolution. Some days she resented being a symbol. Some days she wished she could just be a normal teenage wolf without the weight of pack history on her shoulders. She made mistakes. She rebelled. She had to find her own path, separate from her parents' legacy. The pack reforms didn't solve every problem. Some wolves left, unable to accept the changes. New conflicts arose around how to implement equality while still maintaining necessary structure. And there were always wolves who paid lip service to the reforms while privately maintaining the old prejudices. But the Silvercrest Pack persisted. They adapted. They evolved. They proved that a pack could change its fundamental structure and not just survive but thrive. And 20 years after Lucia's return, when she was no longer the revolutionary Luna but the established matriarch, when her story had become legend, when young wolves grew up learning about her journey in their history lessons, Lucia did something that surprised everyone. She stepped down. "I've done what I came to do," she told the pack. "I've proven that an Omega can lead. I've changed the laws. I've shown that equality makes us stronger. But now it's time for the next generation to take over. Time for Aurelia to become Alpha, to make her own mark, to take everything we've built and make it even better." Some wolves protested. They argued that Lucia was still young enough to lead for decades more, that her presence was essential, that the pack needed her stability. But Lucia was firm. "The best leaders know when it's time to step aside. And the greatest gift I can give my daughter is the chance to lead without living in my shadow." So Aurelia became Alpha at 23 years old, the youngest Alpha in Silvercrest history. And she led with a combination of her father's strength and her mother's compassion. Her own unique vision for the pack's future. And Lucia. She finally got to just be Lucia. Not the Omega who overcame her designation. Not the Luna who changed the world. Just a woman who'd lived an extraordinary life and had earned the right to rest. She and Marcus traveled. They spent time with the grandchildren that Aurelia eventually gave them. They mentored young wolves who struggled with their place in the hierarchy. They wrote down their story so that future generations would know the truth. Not the sanitized legend, but the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of two wolves who loved each other enough to change their world. And on quiet nights, they would sit together in that same garden where their story had begun, and Marcus would say, "Do you remember when I found you in the library?" And Lucia would smile and reply, You mean when you nearly scared me to death? I knew then, Marcus would say. I knew you were going to change my life. I just didn't know how completely. I was nobody then. Just an Omega who liked to read. You were never nobody. Marcus would pull her close. You were always extraordinary. I just had to learn how to see it. This is a story about an Omega who was banished in shame and a pup who whispered, "Mama, don't go." But really, it's a story about how love, real, fierce, uncompromising love, can break down walls that have stood for centuries. About how one woman's refusal to accept her designated worth sparked a revolution. About how the weakest designation produced the strongest leader. It's a story about Marcus learning that true alpha strength isn't about domination but about protection, not about commanding but about empowering, not about standing above but about standing beside. It's a story about Aurelia growing up between two worlds and creating a bridge that allowed both to thrive. But most of all, it's a story about Lucia, the Omega who became Luna, the Banished who became beloved, the woman who proved that sometimes the journey does matter more than the destination, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't fight like hell to reach a destination worth having. And when Lucia was old, when her hair had turned silver and her eyes had seen more than most wolves would in 3 lifetimes, young Omegas would come to her and ask, "How did you do it? How did you change the world?" And she would always give them the same answer. I didn't change the world. Changed myself. I stopped accepting what others told me I should be and became what I knew I could be. I stopped believing in my own weakness and started believing in my own strength. I stopped asking for permission to exist and started demanding the right to thrive. The world changed because I changed. And you can do the same. Every single one of you has that power. Not the power to dominate. Not the power to command. But the power to refuse to be diminished, to insist on your own worth, to love so fiercely that it transforms everything around you. So don't wait for someone to save you. Don't wait for an alpha to see your value. Don't wait for the world to give you permission. Save yourself. See your own value. Give yourself permission. And watch how the world has no choice but to transform around you. And those young wolves would leave transformed, carrying Lucia's message like a torch, lighting new paths in the darkness, proving over and over again that designation doesn't determine destiny, that every wolf, regardless of rank, has the power to change their story. That's the real lesson of this tale. Not that an alpha fell in love with an omega. Not that a banished woman returned in triumph. But that every single one of us has the power to refuse the limitations others place on us, to write our own story, to become the hero of our own journey. So ask yourself, what are you accepting about yourself that isn't true? What limitations have you internalized that were placed on you by others? What would your life look like if you stopped believing in your own weakness and started believing in your own strength? 'Cause you have that strength. You've always had it. Just like Lucia did when she stood in that great hall, banished and broken but not defeated. Just like she did when she survived 3 years alone with a child, building a life from nothing. Just like she did when she returned and refused to be diminished ever again. The power to transform your life isn't outside you. It's inside you. It always has been. You just have to be brave enough to use it. And if a banished Omega can become a legendary Luna, if a woman who was told she was nothing can prove she was everything, if love can bridge impossible gaps and topple ancient hierarchies, then what's stopping you from writing your own extraordinary story? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Except the choice to begin. So begin. Today. Right now. In whatever small way you can. Refuse one limitation. Question one belief. Stand up for yourself in one moment where you'd normally stay silent. Take one step toward the life you deserve instead of the life you've been told to accept. Because that's how revolutions start. Not with grand gestures, but with quiet refusals. Not with someone else's permission, but with your own determination. Not with someone else saving you, but with you saving yourself. Lucia's story is extraordinary, yes. But it's also a mirror, reflecting back what's possible when you refuse to be defined by others, when you claim your own worth, when you love yourself fiercely enough to transform your world. So tell me, are you ready to write your own story? Are you ready to refuse the limitations and claim your power? Are you ready to become the hero you've been waiting for? Because the world is ready for you. It's been ready all along. It's just been waiting for you to be ready for yourself. And that moment of choosing yourself, of believing in yourself, of becoming yourself, that moment is now. So take it. Own it. Let it transform you. Because you're not just an omega or a beta or even an alpha. You're you. And that's more than enough. It's everything.